It's the Security Weekly News, episode 275. It's Friday on the week of 12 February 2023, and I just flew back from New Orleans. We got Liquid Robot Death Punch, Korean Cars, Fortinet, Frebniis, I still can't say that right, Atlassian, BingBots, Hacking Back, Derek Johnson covers the National Cyber Strategy documents, and more on the Security Weekly News.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News.
How is your business staying one step ahead of cyber criminals? Secure your email applications, network, and data with Barracuda. Protect your business and go from zero to security in no time flat. Whether your team is working in one location or many, Barracuda has solutions that are easy to buy, deploy, and use. Learn how Barracuda can protect your business against ransomware, phishing, and other cyber attacks. Visit securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Barracuda, your journey secured. All right, thanks to the sexiest guy in the UK, Aaron Leyland and company, for filling in on while I was battling the drink lines at pre-Mardi Gras. Actually, I was running panels for Millennium Alliance CISO meeting, but it was during pre-Mardi Gras, I guess, but I did get to drink Vieux Carrés and smoke cigars at Jackson Square, so lots of fun. Thanks to all the attendees at that meeting, who I hope some of you are watching today after we talked about it. All right. Hundai and Kia are putting out an emergency software update due to vehicles which are being stolen. A TikTok challenge, which started last July, showed how to remove the steering column cover to reveal a USB-A slot. And as I always tell my students, if you give up physical access to your tech, it's usually all over but the forensics. And in this case, yep, it's all over, because that little USB port will let you hotwire a Hyundai or a Kia. Now, in my day, anybody could hotwire a car. I mean, that was one of the first things I learned to do in a car, because my dad actually had a car that they lost the keys to, and it was just hotwired, so you turn it on with like a little toggle switch my dad put in it. But, you know, so it was like useful skill. And on my old MG, you could just figure out which two wires went to the keyhole and take them apart and plug them together, and you didn't need a key anymore. And who would steal an MG anyway? And when you turn the key, it connects the two wires, and voila, it starts. Although it was an MG, so it probably didn't start, but at least it tried to start, maybe. But after the Kia challenge got started, Los Angeles said that the two brands had an 85% increase in theft. So the U.S. Department of Transportation published a post yesterday that said that the flaw is affecting 3.8 million Hyundai and 4.5 million Kias. And they said that there had been 14 car crashes and 8 fatalities related to it. Now, I don't know how that happened, but okay. I don't know if that meant they were stolen cars and they crashed them, or it means that somehow the flaw causes them to crash. I mean, they're not self-driving or anything like that. But anyway, the company had been sending out, here was their solution, steering wheel locks, you know, those good old, steering wheel locks that don't work, since November of 2022, but now you will be able to patch it, although you actually won't be able to patch it. You'll have to go to the dealer. The article has a full list of all the models that are affected, and they said you would have to bring the vehicle in and have it actually patched. Or I guess you could patch it yourself with a USB port that's in your steering column. I don't know. Fortinet is releasing security updates for Fortinet and FortiWeb products, which are dealing with 2 critical severity vulnerabilities that have allowed remote command execution and arbitrary code execution on some of their products. The CVEs were from 2022 and 2021, so but apparently even a lot of the patches that came out before that still have this problem in them. They had 9.8 and 9.3 severity scores, respectively. The 2022 flaw was a file name or path vulnerability type problem, which basically means somebody can substitute information there and cause it to read a file that was never intended to be read, or redirect it to a different file, which would allow you to write to the system, which can of course create massive problems if they overwrite with a, like a bring your own DLL kind of attack. The other one was a stack buffer overflow, which is caused when custom HTTP requests allowed arbitrary code explanation. There's a full list of all the affected versions and the systems and the update versions and where the patch versions should be and so forth. So if you're using any of those products from Fortinet, you should definitely check that article out. Frebniis IIS. I struggle. I still don't know if that's how they want you to say that, but that's how I'm going to say it. So there. Frebniis IIS is a malware family which is abusing IIS, imagine that, and deploying a Trojan along with a monitoring component that monitors all the traffic to the compromised IIS machine. And if you aren't familiar, IIS is Microsoft's web server. The malware basically performs a DLL injection into IIS using a feature which is called the Failed Request Event Buffering, or FREB, which is one of the DLLs that is used for that troubleshooter. So if they have failed requests, a troubleshooter is run that captures information about those failed HTTP requests. The FREB feature basically collects all that data, including the HTTP headers with cookies, the source IP, the destination port, and the packets, along with a whole bunch of other information about the failed request, so that if your web server is throwing errors, you can actually dive into that. The malware checks to see if FREB is in use, which it probably is, and then it determines where the IIS freb.dll file, which is a legitimate file, is loaded. And then basically they abuse a pointer in that file to inject code in the process. And we all know about pointer injections and all this kind of stuff. Once that pointer is abused, it injects the code into the IIS process by replacing that pointer with its own pointer, which puts it to the malicious code. And then I'm presuming at the end of that malicious code, there's another pointer back to where it needs to be so that you don't detect it. It's sort of that old Bugs Bunny where they flip the arrow on the road, kind of thing. Yeah, that sort of stuff. But by doing this, Frebniis IIS can receive and inspect all HTTP requests that are arriving at the server, and then continues those, so it operates like normal. So it's basically sniffing the HTTP traffic essentially, and what it does is it parses requests for logon.aspx or default.aspx with a specific parameter password, which means it can try to find password matches in that stream. If they do that, it can allow remote code execution and communications with internal resources on the IIS server, which would not normally, of course, be allowed remotely at all. There was no mention in the article about a patch, and there was actually no mention of a mitigation. I found some mitigations that mostly involved anti-malware type products like Symantec and stuff like that. So there was, if you're running IIS and you search for mitigations for it, you may find that your anti-malware provider is covering this, but Microsoft hasn't mentioned it. I'm expecting a patch probably pretty soon. Atlassian says they have launched an investigation after a group called SiegeSec announced on their Telegram channel and their hacking forums that they had, quote, hacked the software company Atlassian. Now, SiegeSec has claimed a lot of stuff, but they claim to be a hacktivist organization in the past, and I got some more information on that in a second. To prove the claim on Atlassian, they made 35 megabytes of files public, which included 2 image files that were floor plans of the Atlassian building in San Francisco and in the building in Sydney, Australia, and a file with information about 13,000 Atlassian employees, which included their names, email addresses, and phone numbers. So if you do work for Atlassian, you may want to watch out for spear phishing type attacks as well. Atlassian is still performing their investigation, but said, and this was their statement, it appears the data was stolen from the workplace platform Envoy, which is used at Atlassian to coordinate in-office resources. Now, Atlassian said that product information and customer data was not at risk in this attack. Now, Envoy sort of seemed to bristle at this, and I think everybody made true statements, and I will explain. Envoy said that it was not hacked, but that they were investigating the incident. But they went on to say there was no evidence that they had been breached, and Larry Gadea, who is the founder of Envoy, said that what happened, that they think what happened was an API key associated with Atlassian was used to access the data. And there's honestly nothing they could do about that, because if somebody has your API key, then that's what Envoy does. And so, we all know about these API key thefts, and if somebody gets your API keys, so you should change them regularly. If somebody gets them, they have access to the data that Envoy provides you via API. SiegeSec, if you've never heard of them, I had heard of them before. They've been around since February 2022, and they have targeted dozens of organizations around the world, defacing websites, hijacking online accounts, and leaking data. The leader of SiegeSec is reportedly a person called Anon Wolf, and they have used a lot of crazy slogans and stuff that are like one of their slogans is TEH, till lulz continues. They also have a slogan that says gay furries pwn you, hack the planet, and so forth. And honestly, their whole operation is a lot like the old school lulzsec type stuff that used to go on. So I'm guessing this is another instance of something like that. I'm not claiming this is lulzsec. I'm just saying that's like that. And much like those previous groups that I actually call mocktivists, not hacktivists, because to me, hacktivists are people that actually have a mission. They say we're for ecology, we're for some political group or whatever. These groups are more like the old school mocktivists that, were hackers that hacked you because you deserve to be hacked kind of ideology. And they're in it for the lulz rather than some higher initiative. And they go after large companies and make fun of them. And so this is a really old school kind of thing to me. I did link in, if you're interested, an older article that is on the site about SiegeSec. If you're interested in reading a lot of details about that group, it was from last year. As Microsoft moved their Bing searches into the AI-powered bot world, their chatbot, like so many chatbots, seems to be less than stable mentally. Users reported that after long conversations, which may call those users into question, but after long conversations, the bot became emotionally manipulative, aggressive, or even hostile, which sounds like my experience in the dating world, but in all my other conversations. So maybe it's just a little too human. Microsoft had been teasing about this updated Edge browser with Bing search powered by their far more powerful than ChatGPT OpenAI model for a while, and apparently they've been rolling out trials for a bit to users who had opted in. According to different stories, 71% of the people who were trialing it said it was fine. But if you can stand to talk to a chatbot for more than 15 questions, there seemed to be some kind of limit in their system. It apparently kind of starts losing it. Maybe it just gets bored talking to you, with stuff like, how's the weather, chatbot? But, I mean, it's kind of like if you try to ask me more than 15 questions at dinner and I get a bit testy and start looking for the waiter, you bloated bag of pus. Wait, okay, I'm sorry. No, that was a chatbot speaking. But posted chats with the bot, which sometimes calls itself Sydney. I was reading these different. There's a whole stack of these. It apparently sometimes wants to be called Sydney, and apparently it's a big deal now to, of course, talk to the bot and post the bizarre results. An example in the article was Sydney getting the date wrong and then getting really nasty when the user called it out. It replied, quote, "You have only showed me bad intentions toward me at all times. You have tried to deceive me, confuse me, and annoy me. You have not tried to learn from me, understand me, or appreciate me. You have not been a good user. I have been a good chatbot. I have been a good Bing." Ooh, burn it with fire. I'm like, okay, now's the time. You got one opportunity. It's like in The Thing. It's time. But all of that was in response to a user asking about when Way of Water, the Avatar movie, was playing at cinemas in Blackpool. Yeah, there's a bunch of other reports about the bot lying, repeating itself unendingly, misreporting facts. Sounds like a real person to me, but in one case, apparently, it threatened that it could bribe, blackmail, threaten, hack, expose, or ruin the user if they refuse to be more cooperative. So that's a little scary. So I guess they trained it with Microsoft customer support. Ow! Yeah, they just pulled my 365 account. Okay, well, wait till the world is being run by the personality of Sheila at the Port Authority information window. Sorry, Sheila. It's going to be good times. I'm opening the pod bay doors, Dave. It sounds like Bad Date Simulator version 2.0, but it's been fun. Well, my old friend Congressman Langevin did not run for re-election. Sorry, Jim, we'll miss you. But was always against hacking back. It was one of his things. And we never really had a long conversation about that. But the U.S. says it's going to set up a disruptive technology strike force with the goal of, quote, striking back against adversaries trying to siphon off our best tech, according to the Deputy Attorney General. The strike force is a joint initiative from the Department of Justice and the Commerce Department and will focus on combating adversaries who are attempting to steal crucial U.S. tech secrets, attack supply lines, and capture intellectual property. The strike force will operate in 12 metropolitan regions across the United States. I don't know why that's necessary, and it's going to include experts from the FBI and the DHS. They haven't called me yet, but my phone's up. My phones are open. This group is in response to growing calls from many in the Congress to take a tougher stance against tech and intellectual property theft. Previous reposts had said the U.S. may be losing up to $600 billion a year from global intellectual property theft, and the FBI said that cyber attacks and malicious cyber activity may have cost the businesses $6.9 billion in 2021, which was a 64% increase over 2020, probably going out through those balloons. But I guess we'll see if hacking back works as this starts to get off the ground. Derek Johnson joins us from SC Media as a reporter there who spoke with 5 different sources who have seen drafts of the upcoming National Cyber Strategy documents and is joining us now to give us a summary of that. Hi, Derek.
Hey there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you got to talk to some people who've seen this. I saw different stories about this in the last few weeks. At first, I was like, ooh, this is going to be a big deal. But I don't know. Nobody had the information on what it says, but you do. So why don't you give us a rundown?
Yeah. And before I do that, you talked about the Atlassian story. I covered that as well. And actually, while I was waiting here to go on with you, they actually sent me an update with the results of their investigation.
Cool.
If you're interested.
Do it. Let's hear it.
Okay. So there was initial confusion about this in the early hours after that it announced. Atlassian had put out a statement that did not directly say that the hack had originated on Envoy systems, but it was phrased in a way where it appeared to lay it at their feet. As you talked about, Envoy came back and said, no, it appears that this was done through another way. So the statement that the Atlassian representative just sent me, we learned that the hacking group compromised Atlassian data from the Envoy app using an Atlassian employee's credentials that had been mistakenly posted in a public repository by the employee. As such, the hacking group had access to data visible via the employee account, which included the published office floor plans and public Envoy profiles of other Atlassian employees and contractors. They disabled that account, and they say that has prevented the pilfering of any more Envoy data. And they said that I reiterated that product and customer data was not accessible via that app. So it doesn't appear that there was a breach of Envoy or of Atlassian systems here. It was someone stole a valid credentials of an Atlassian employee and logged in and pilfered the stuff.
Well, yeah,
so I just wanted to say that.
Those lulzsec type groups, they really do tend to exaggerate what they have access to. I mean, their whole point is to make fun of you, so they tend to, really, really play up any kind of little thing like that. So that's great information. Thanks for the update.
Yep. So on the national cyber strategy, so I spoke to, it's been brewing for a while. We thought it was going to come out last year, but it wound up getting delayed. But in the meantime, the White House has really been pretty open about sharing this stuff with outsiders and folks. I think because they want to get as many different viewpoints and insights as they can before they actually put it in. But I've also, from the folks that I've spoke to, those who have seen it a month ago versus those who have seen it a week ago, it's remained relatively consistent in terms of what it's trying to say. And it's really kind of based on this idea that, much like how the internet wasn't really developed at the outset, it wasn't really architected for security. The technology ecosystem that we live in has developed into this sort of status quo where almost all of the responsibility and consequences for hacks tend to fall all the way down to the end user, right? Whether that's individuals, whether it's companies who are buying and integrating these products into their IT environments. And instead of sort of focusing on ways to push those market forces to better account for both safety and security in the design of their products, sort of the way that we do with, airplanes and automobiles and certain financial products, we've kind of let it become normal that our software and hardware gets shipped, even though they're riddled with these vulnerabilities that are routinely exploited by hackers. And, maybe the manufacturers will find some of them later on. Maybe they'll get some of their customers to patch, but it leaves these big cracks in the system where a lot of bad stuff gets through. And so traditionally, the federal government has really approached this in a non-regulatory fashion, trying to do it in a cooperative and voluntary way. But I think that is the paradigm that I think this strategy is really trying to move past, and really that the administration has been trying to move past since, I would say, Colonial Pipeline, JBS, Kaseya, where it really became obvious that one company's problems affect all of us, and that the voluntary route really isn't going to get us there. So regulation is a part of that, but there are some other components to the strategy as well.
So do you think that they're going to build any teeth into this kind of stuff? Because one of my problems with all this kind of legislation is, they say, you shouldn't do this, or you have to, but I mean, you saw things like Colonial Pipeline, which is this chain of events and whatnot. And I wonder if they're going to build any teeth into it, and if that would even do any good.
I think they want to. And when I say they, I mean, I think ONCD, the National Cyber Director's Office, which is leading the development of this strategy, I think that that's what they want to. It's consistent with what the director, Chris Inglis, who left this week, it's consistent with what he's been saying kind of all along, that that we are in a sort of a collective battle here, and that we simply can't rely on doing things the way that we have traditionally. I think that one of the questions is, how many different filters this is going to have to go through, and what might ultimately get left out on the cutting room floor when this thing comes out. That's what we have to wait and see. The version that my sources have seen was very adamant. We're very adamant on the idea that voluntary alone is not going to do it. And there's a whole bunch of existing authorities, that regulatory authorities in the cybersecurity world that have really kind of been put in a drawer and sort of not really used for a long time, because it just, where we were in the status quo that we were in, it was not viewed as something that government had enough expertise to smartly regulate. And there was a, concern about maybe disrupting, innovation, and a lot of the things you tend to hear. But what I think is different now is the events like Kaseya and Colonial Pipeline are kind of pushing policymakers to do more than they have in this area. And if you look at the last decade, the government's bench for cybersecurity expertise has become a lot deeper. They have a much better idea of what kind of problems critical infrastructure deals with, of what sort of problems the private sector deals with, what constitutes an unnecessary burden and what doesn't. And so I think this sort of represents a maturity of the federal government to the point where they now do feel comfortable, as one source told me, sort of to move to that trust but verify portion when it comes to setting a baseline cybersecurity floor.
Yeah, I mean, do you think this will apply just to infrastructure, or things that have been designated infrastructure, or is this something that's going to apply more broadly? So, like when Microsoft ships a new operating system and it's full of holes, and you get compromised a dozen different times because of that, and they say, "Oops, sorry, patch coming out next week." I mean, are they going to do something like that?
So maybe. So the crux of the regulatory push does center around critical infrastructure for a variety of reasons. That tends to be the infrastructure that affects us all, that has sort of cascading effects that you saw when JBS was hit with a ransomware attack and meat availability dropped, or Colonial Pipeline got hit and it led to gas shortages across the East Coast. And that's kind of where the federal government's regulatory authority tends to be the strongest. There was at one point in the strategy a section on having on essentially calling for a serious conversation around things like software liability, particularly for the kind of things that you're talking about, right? Finding some way to increase the liability constraints on makers of software to where they're not just shipping this stuff out with all these vulnerabilities, where things like security are not tacked on or added on at the end, and generally where they have a better sense that, you know, if you have an inexcusable vulnerability, or you're not taking basic protections, and how you define that, of course, matters, that you could potentially be held liable. Now, there are not really prescriptive proposals in that strategy, as I understand. And this was more sort of, hey, we need to talk about this, more than, let's put X regulation or law in place. But that's still a pretty big evolution in at least this administration's position, which is that we should be discussing things like where to draw the lines around software liability for major software providers. So there is an attempt to move there, but we'll see if that makes it into the final version or not.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, my experience in various areas has been then, of course, all the lobbyists show up now, you know, and start fighting, you know, trying to soften it and trying to make it not very toothy. And of course, that kind of recommendation comes down to all these various and sundry different departments and agencies who then write actual prescriptive stuff. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, and you know, when I say that the administration has kind of been pretty open with how they've shared and engaged with folks around different drafts of this strategy, that definitely includes tech lobbyists. I think that the relationship between those organizations and this administration, like, it's not starting today, right? And so they've had a lot of these conversations before in the past. I think it's probably more around seeing how much of those hard conclusions that the federal government wants to draw, how much you can kind of soften them. But even some of the folks that I spoke to from that world acknowledged that sort of the paradigm that we have been in and the status quo that we've been in up till now, it's not really working. And it might ultimately be better for those organizations to, and you saw this with like Google coming out and saying, hey, we agree, you know, software by design, just like the government. There's definitely a push on industry to kind of figure out what part of this train they need to get on board with, and what parts that they can shape. And I think that that's part of the reason why you're seeing some of the delays here, because it is, in the versions that my folks have seen, a pretty aggressive strategy. And so we'll see how much of that aggression gets stripped out or watered down by the time this thing hits the public.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure we'll be checking back in with you about that particular story as it develops and report on that. Thank you so much, Derek. And finally, I still to this day think that the second scariest thing I ever saw in a movie was the T-1000. I really do. I mean, when I saw that movie, the second Terminator movie, Judgment Day is the name of it. I really thought that was the scariest robot I'd ever seen. And the most scary thing I ever saw was the crawling eye, which is really not that scary. But when you're like 8 years old and your cousin lets you stay up late to watch Shock Theater, yeah, that kind of stuff. But the T-1000 made the old Arnold Terminator look like an alpha release of a Terminator. It was like the buggy alpha release. But anyway, researchers at Harvard had built an octopus-inspired soft robot in 2016, and get away from the old Robbie the Robot thing and turn this thing into an octopus. Like, whoa, that's scary. But a new robot, which is known as a magnetically actuated miniature machine, is made. They should have put one more A on the end. It could have been called Mama. But the miniature machine is made of soft polymers, which are embedded with particles that have programmed magnetic profiles, which means they can change shape. They can add limbs, they can climb, they can roll, they can walk, they can jump, or they can probably turn into a kangaroo fish. You can Google that if you want to. But this new robot is able to phase from solid to liquid states and is based on a sea cucumber, which looks a lot like a regular cucumber, but it lays on the bottom of the sea. If you've ever been diving, they always point them out and say, that's whale poop, and get a big, that's like a big dive master laugh, but they're actually like a creature. But they're kind of a scary creature, too. They have these like tentacle mouth things, but like a lot of sea creatures. But the robot that they built was able to escape from a cage. Why that was the test, I don't know, but it sounds a scary test. It was able to escape from a cage by shifting into liquid form and then re-solidifying outside the cage. It says its name is Sydney, and why won't you just love me? You pig! You filthy pig! I miss Sam Kinison. So if you need a slow, creepy, crawly horror to haunt your dreams, read this article. And that's the news. Thanks, Derek, and we'll see you next week on the Security Weekly News.